Russia's largest shipping company, Sovcomflot, which operates tankers in the shadow fleet, is rapidly losing profit. According to the company's report, its revenues in 2024 amounted to $424 million, half of what it earned in 2023. The primary reason – sanctions. Sovcomflot was added to sanctions list back in 2022, but a significant result will only achieved when Ukraine's partners began imposing restrictions on the company's subsidiaries in third countries. The company has stated that further tightening of sanctions would lead to reduced contract payments and additional financial losses.
There
is a practice where, after a sanctioned company managing a vessel in a third country is targeted, all those vessels are then transferred in a chain to another company in the same country. We are specifically tracking this case with vessels previously owned by Sovcomflot. The Russian Federation will continue creating new companies and transferring ships there, but each new company formation takes additional time, money, and resources.
Along with Sovcomflot, the budget of the aggressor state is also losing revenue. According to the Russian Ministry of Finance, oil and gas companies contributed more than 771 billion rubles in taxes in February. This is 18% less than the same period last year. In addition to sanctions, Moscow's revenue decline was also affected by the fall in oil prices.
Russian Deputy Finance Minister Vladimir Kouchev stated that due to falling oil prices, the budget could lose up to 1% of GDP in revenues by the end of the year. In monetary terms, the budget deficit could increase by up to 2 trillion rubles, despite the government's plans to reduce it almost threefold this year. From the Deutsche Welle publication.
In 2025, Ukraine's partners continued to ramp up sanctions pressure on Russia. A major blow to the aggressor state was the restrictions on Russian oil exports imposed by Washington and London. These are the most extensive sanctions since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. The sanctions list includes not only shadow fleet tankers, but also major Russian companies, such as Surgutneftegas and Gazprom Neft, along with their subsidiaries. Additionally, LNG infrastructure, subcontractors, service providers, traders and insurers have also been targeted. The Kremlin should not expect any easing of restrictions. On the contrary, the White House has announced plans to tighten sanctions against Russia.
Per President Trump's guidance, sanctions will be used explicitly and aggressively for immediate maximum impact. They will be carefully monitored to ensure that they are achieving specific objectives. Scott Bessent, United States Secretary of the Treasury.
US President Donald Trump has stated that he is considering new large-scale sanctions against Russia as a means of pressuring Moscow into negotiations.
I am strongly considering large-scale banking sanctions and tariffs on Russia until a ceasefire and final settlement agreement on peace is reached. Donald Trump, President of the United States, on Truth Social.
On March 12, Canada will host a summit of foreign ministers from the G7 nations. According to Bloomberg, Ottawa plans to include in the final communique a provision on the creation of a working group to monitor the violation of sanctions against Russia, particularly concerning its shadow fleet. Reported by Katerina Bastun, Andriy Dmitrenko, UATV News. The Kremlin understands that the war against Ukraine is also devastating for Russia, but the Russian army still has the potential to advance further. This is the assessment of Kirill Budanov, chief of the main Directorate of Intelligence of Ukraine. According to him, the full-scale invasion of Ukraine is costing the aggressor country an enormous amount. Russia spends approximately $1 billion per day on the war.
Це взагалі дуже дорога війна.
This is an extremely expensive war. A single day of war costs them just under $1 billion, an enormous sum. As for human resources, we must not deceive ourselves. Russia's mobilization potential, according to calculations, allows them to continue advancing. However, the pace and the number of casualties are factors they cannot ignore, and they do take them into account.
The head of Ukrainian intelligence also reminded that according to official data, Russia's defense budget accounts for 41% of the country's main expenditure.
Це ненормальні цифри.
These are abnormal figures. To accommodate this budget, nearly all social programs, including healthcare and education, have been cut. The negative financial and economic impact on the Russian Federation is already noticeable. However, as long as they have oil, gas, metals, and precious stones, they will try to balance the situation.
Pouring most of the budget into the military-industrial complex has already given results. The truth is disappointing. Inflation of 10%, an interest rate of 21%, rising food prices and falling incomes of citizens. One of Russia's largest dairy producers has already announced it will raise its wholesale prices by up to 15% in March. Prices are not the only thing rising, so is overdue mortgage debt. Russia's total overdue mortgage debt has reached nearly 100 billion rubles. Meanwhile, the total volume of mortgage loans has grown by 7% over the past year, reaching over 19 trillion rubles by early January, according to the central bank.
In 2023, the total mortgage portfolio in Russia increased by 4.2 trillion rubles, compared to 2.1 trillion in 2022. Until July 2024, Russia had a widespread preferential mortgage program for new buildings at an 8% interest rate. The opportunity to buy real estate at minimal rates encouraged many to take out mortgages without fully assessing the financial capabilities. Evgeny Shavnev, CEO of the real estate investment company Flip LLC, cited by the Moscow Times.
Russia's industrial production growth has also slowed, according to the Ministry of Economic Development. In January 2025, industrial output increased by just 2%, half of the average growth rate from the previous year. While the defense sector is ramping up production, civilian industries are struggling. Furniture production fell by 2.4% in January, clothing and footwear output fell by almost 3.5%, and food processing slowed by 2%. At the same time, the central bank continues to report that Russia's GDP grew by more than 4% last year.
Although GDP growth formally remains high, real productive activity in the economy has almost ceased to expand. Almost all of the recorded growth comes from the defense sector. Without it, production levels remain at 2021 levels. Civilian industries have been stagnating since mid-2023, and in the second half of last year, even with the defense boom, the entire industrial sector entered stagnation. From the report of the Center for Macroeconomic Analysis and Short-Term Forecasting.
Nearly a third of Russia's logistic companies are on the verge of bankruptcy. Experts warn that if the government does not provide support, at least 30% of market participants will go bankrupt in 2025. This would lead to a shortage of transportation equipment, a 25% increase in shipping rates, and a rise in consumer prices. According to the IMP, Russia's economic growth is expected to slow nearly threefold from its current level to just 1.5% in 2025. Reported by Katerina Bastun, Yulia Granovska, UATV News.